Question number 3, Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Does he stand by his statement that he would post a meaningful surplus in 2014-15? If so, what approximate dollar figure would constitute a meaningful surplus?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, yes, I stand by that statement. In answer to the second part of the member's question, in the current circumstances of low interest rates and inflation that could be heading to zero, any surplus will be meaningful.
Any surplus? Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Why then, if any surplus at all would be meaningful, did he and John Key make that promise the centrepiece of 2 election campaigns? And wouldn't a failure to post a decent surplus actually mean he's broken his promise to New Zealanders?
Order.
Mr. Speaker,
Honourable Bill English.
the centrepiece of our election campaigns were the outstanding leadership of the Prime Minister, the very good management of the economy that's helping lead to higher incomes and more jobs, and we are on track to surplus. But of course it would be easier to achieve it if that member stopped organising protests in Wellington against any constraint in the public service, as he regularly does.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Jamil-Lee Ross.
What progress can the Minister report on the government's track to surplus?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, our record is one of steady improvement in the movement towards surplus, and what I might say were somewhat trying circumstances. For instance, a deep recession followed by an earthquake where the government has contributed $15 billion to the rebuilding of Christchurch. So I can report that from a large deficit of around $18 billion, current forecasts have us headed towards surplus over the next 2 years.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
In light of that answer, why then, knowing about the global financial crisis and the recession, did he promise to New Zealanders for 2 elections in a row that a meaningful surplus would be reached in 2014-15?
Honourable Bill
Mr.
English.
Speaker, because we believe that is achievable. We believe that uniquely among developed countries, we are able to protect the most vulnerable, not reduce any entitlements, improve our public services and get better results, maintain stability in our public services without large-scale change, and get back to surplus. Now, I admit to the member, it's a bit difficult, but we're just about there.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Can the Minister confirm his answer to the primary question that a surplus of $1 will constitute a meaningful surplus in his world?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, yes, as I said, any surplus will be meaningful, but they're likely to be larger if that member stops organising protests against restraint in the public service, as exhibited by him here with his megaphone protesting outside the Stats Department against reasonable constraints.
Order.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Does the Minister think he might be able to manage a $1 bill surplus because he is overcharging New Zealanders $178 million because the ACC worker and earner accounts are fully funded? And why will he not give New Zealanders a fair go and not overcharge them for ACC?
Honourable Bill English, either of those 2 supplementary questions.
Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with any of that. As I said to the member, the government's been consistently conservative in the way it's handled ACC levies, and we've had smaller increases than officials recommended and smaller decreases. But even in that context, by 1 April next year, we will have reduced ACC levies by $1.5 billion per year, the equivalent of a moderate tax cut for every household in New Zealand.
Speaker.
Supplementary. Order. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Given that he is satisfied with a $1 meaningful surplus, will he now not give New Zealanders back the $178 million that he has ripped off them from overcharging them for ACC?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the government is giving back, I think, or ACC is giving back something like $450 million of ACC levy cuts on the 1st of April, including a reduction of $130 for every New Zealander who registers a car. Now, that's not a bad effort.
Question number 4, Catherine Delahunty.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. He mihi nui ki te whare paramata. To the Minister of Education, tēnā koe. Is she planning to undertake